The Hitman world of Assassination games are one of my favourite AAA releases of the past few years. It's an extremely unique quote-unquote stealth series with a quirky sense of humour, particularly when it comes to the absolutely absurd and cartoony assassination methods that sometimes don't even make the least bit of sense. And the cherry on top of that greatness is the really interesting, diverse locations that you can play through and explore. After some consideration, I decided why not just rank them, because I really do love this trilogy and want to share what I think of the maps, which are in my opinion the most important part of the games. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to be ranking them based on a number of factors, but primarily on the quality of the targets, the design of the locations themselves, and how well the gameplay flows. I'm also unfortunately only going to be looking at the quality of the main missions, as the bonus stories are kind of their own thing. The sniper assassin locations won't be here either, but that's because I simply just don't like them and don't care enough. So if you came here to see them, this probably isn't your video. And finally, even though I've tried to dodge them as much as possible, there will be some unavoidable spoilers throughout the video, so click off if you don't want to risk it. With all that said, let's head straight in. Something that new and long-term players seem to mostly agree on is that Colorado, at least with the main story mission, is not very good. Despite the trilogy's missions being mostly great with a couple of flops here and there, Colorado is the only one that I'd actually consider bad. The most immediate problem with this map is that it lacks the charm that made Hitman 2016 so interesting at first and replaces goofy gimmicks with a bland, uninspired setting that the developers failed to use to its full potential. While I get that the studio wanted to do something different by ramping up the stakes and difficulty, the entire map just doesn't look or feel interesting and is ultimately a waste of resources, in my opinion. Unlike the previous maps, Colorado has 4 targets to eliminate instead of the usual 2 or 3. Sean Rose and Ezra Berg do have a somewhat interesting background for their lore, but are unfortunately not very well integrated within the mission. While they have some fun methods of assassination, they pale in comparison to many of the other maps and fail to leave that much of an impression. I think there's a case to be made that Penelope Graves also has a decent backstory, but sadly she is even less present and probably has the least elimination potential of all of the map's targets. Then there's Maya Parvati, who has literally nothing memorable about her whatsoever, to the point I keep forgetting her name. You'll later learn as the list goes on that I'm a big fan of ramping up the stakes and tension. For example, Berlin and Hokkaido, which you'll see much higher on this list, pull off this concept perfectly without making the gameplay rigid and uncomfortable. Again, I like that IOI tried to do something different, but this wasn't it. 4 out of 10 needs improvement. If the medal of worst map goes to Colorado, then the medal of missed opportunities goes to Marrakesh. Don't get me wrong, this map isn't bad, it's just okay. It returns Hitman back to a very lively setting from Sapienza and possesses 2 distinct areas. The Swedish consulate housing Strandberg is my favourite of the 2 because it has a very distinct disguise hierarchy and, in my opinion, the more interesting assassination opportunities. Though if it weren't for the stupid staircase at the back giving you access to the 2nd floor without any kind of obstacle to overcome, I think I'd enjoy it a lot more. The second area is the abandoned high school, where you'll find General Zaydan, which I just find to be far less interesting and variant, though it does give a great contrast to the very contemporary feel of the consulate, which goes to show just how much effect Klaus Strandberg's crimes may have on the Moroccan state. Speaking of Strandberg, I also think he's the superior target. He's just much more interesting and the game provides you with more exciting assassination methods. Then again, Zaydan to me is very clearly secondary, so I don't think it matters. What really bugs me about this map and drags it this low is how poorly integrated both locations are. They are so far away from each other for absolutely zero reason, and it means that trying to complete some of the mission stories is absolutely fucking awful. I feel like this map would improve a lot for these targets specifically if the school angle was axed entirely, with Zaydan instead roaming the streets, and it would be even better if the different shops played into the ways you could off him. As it is, the whole market angle is irrelevant and really just a nuisance. To end on a good note, even after the Game of the Year update, I think the lighting and design of the map in general is far superior to Colorado and actually quite pretty. So even though the mission itself isn't that memorable, the location definitely is. 5 out of 10. You might be surprised that it isn't dead last, because this map really isn't well designed at all. I do think having the final mission take place on a moving train is actually kind of cool, and for a public transportation enthusiast like myself it was a real treat. But besides that, it is possibly the least fun map to play of all of them, simply because it is such a linear gameplay. This map has very little replayability and absolutely zero need to exist when you ignore its story relevance. Despite how much I don't like this map though, I do think that it has some saving graces that push it a little bit above Colorado and Marrakesh. First of all, it is extremely straightforward when it comes to completing all of the challenges, so you don't really need to replay it that much, and second of all, being able to eliminate the constant is an absolutely amazing idea that I'm really glad they included. Maybe if he was in a better location, then this level could have been a lot more memorable, because after all of the focus that was put onto this character, it's an underwhelming finale. Overall, this is undeniably a poorly designed map, but I think it's forgivable due to its much smaller scale. 5 out of 10. At this point of the video, we're moving from the mediocre to the average, and possibly the most average map of all of them is Dartmoor. The mission itself is extremely straightforward and takes place in a single family estate belonging to the Carlyles. All you have to do is eliminate one of the partners, Alexa, and retrieve her documents. To me, Alexa is a great singular target. Her design and voice acting reek wealth and dominance, which is very fitting for one of the most powerful people in the world. As for the ways you can kill her, there's not the greatest variance, but I think that's alright considering that this is basically just a house. Retrieving the documents is also extremely simple and easy to complete on replays, though I think it would be better if this was made optional after the first playthrough. The real star of the show with this map, however, is the mission stories. While not linked directly to the assassination of Alexa, the murder mystery plotline is very different for Hitman and pretty enjoyable on first playthrough. It also perfectly leads into you completing your task, so it doesn't feel like a waste of time. In fact, this is one of the best designed mission stories of all of them, and while I typically play with them off, this was one of the few exceptions I made just because I wanted to experience it. So if I have so much positives to say about this map, why do I call it average? I feel like it's average because I can't realistically rate it higher. It's just too standard, and the map doesn't feel particularly grand either. And as I said before, it's quite limited when it comes to assassinations as well, so it doesn't really have the wow factor of basically every other map. And while I was really glad to see my country feature properly for the first time in the trilogy, especially with a beautiful national park like Dartmoor, I can't help but feel disappointed because there really isn't that much to do on it outside of the mission stories. It's not low on the list because it's poorly designed or anything, it's just devoid of personality compared to many of the others. And I think that's okay for what it was trying to do, because by having a quiet and uneventful map like this right before the story took a crazy unexpected turn, it definitely took me by surprise. While the location isn't anything special, it's still definitely got a lot to enjoy, and I would consider it a successful map. 6 out of 10. I think Hawke's Bay is a good opening map for Hitman 2 and serves as an introductory gameplay tutorial without sacrificing its recognition as an actual map, like the ICA facility did. In the past few segments I've thrown around the words basic and simple quite a lot, and it doesn't get much more basic and simple than this. I did say Dartmoor was basically just a house, which is kind of true, but you've also got the gardens and the nice mission stories. Hawke's Bay, however, really is just a house and nothing else. The first reason as to why I think it edges out Dartmoor is because I like how much potential a small area can give you for elimination methods. There's probably more to do here than a lot of the maps I just spoke about and some of the above, and I really like that. The second reason, the more important of the two, is that unlike Dartmoor, the stealth angle is far more present and actually really engaging. The whole mission plays like a home invasion, and in a sort of messed up way, it's kind of fun to be right next to the target 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐻𝐬 without her knowing you're actually there. Where the map loses points, however, is with how rigid replays are. You can only leave the map in one fashion, and 𝐓𝐬𝐻𝐬 doesn't really have a loop, just a series of events that act like a nighttime routine. If you miss an opportunity, you either have to reload a save or restart the entire level on higher difficulties, which is just not a fun way to play Hitman. I can understand that it serves purely as a reintroduction to the series, but they definitely tried way more than they needed to, and that's pretty cool. 6 out of 10. Just a disclaimer that you should take my opinion on Ambrose Island with an extra grain of salt. The map functions and looks fine, the slapping contest is really fun, and the targets are passable. I played this map a few weeks after completing the game, and if I'm honest, I haven't even gotten it to mastery level 20. Maybe I'll make it a dedicated review if I ever change my mind, but nevertheless, I'm sorry if you did want me to talk about it. It just wouldn't feel fair doing so when I haven't even really given it a chance. Not gonna rate this one, but you can probably gauge how I feel about it based on my tone and its position in the list. Consider this one an honourable mention. I cannot believe that this game actually features a song that is so good that I could see it charting if it got a full release. Amazing job. But outside of that, I think Bangkok leaves something to be desired. I really like how it looks, and it seems like I'm one of the few people who prefers the Game of the Year lighting changes over the original, but in terms of actual design it's subpar. The map is unnecessarily big, and it's quite tedious to traverse due to how similar the whole thing feels, and a lot of it goes underutilized due to a lack of available opportunity. Speaking of that, the targets are a mixed bag for me. First of all, there's Jordan Cross, one of the greatest targets in the entire trilogy. A story about an emerging rock star murdering his girlfriend and her parents wanting justice through assassination is a good concept, and you can really sense the douchiness of Jordan when interacting with him. As for his assassination methods, they are also extremely memorable and fun. 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐸 did a great job all around with him. However, the secondary target, Ken Morgan, is absolutely insufferable and moves at a snail's pace. It makes sense for him to be here, seeing as he helped cover up Hannah Highmore's murder, but he is unfortunately really badly implemented, and his Queen Suite angle is absolutely infuriating, both because of how slow he is and the amount of distance it is from the rest of the map. Differences in quality like the ones between Morgan and Cross are mind-blowing, because how are you going to put out one of the best targets and then one of the worst in the very same location? I just don't get it. This map doesn't have it quite as bad as Marrakesh because the central area isn't quite as large and does actually serve a purpose. In my opinion, this map would be much better if there was just the one penthouse suite with the recording studio and Morgan staying in deluxe room on some kind of business trip. Overall, a bit of a letdown, but with an absolutely iconic soundtrack and a great target. 6 out of 10.
I'm rocking the suburbs, just like Michael Jackson did. I'm rocking the suburbs.
Whittleton Creek is perhaps the map that has moved about the most in terms of how much I like it. On first playthrough, I loved it, and it was within my top 5, but while trying to get the challenges, for some reason I absolutely hated it, and I had it ranked even lower than Colorado. But now, I think it's alright. Just not great. I know a ton of people love the suburban setting of this map, but I'll admit that I just don't. The map itself looks great, and the people working on it got it spot on. It looks exactly like an American suburb, even though as a British person who's only been to America a few times, I might be completely wrong. The map features 2 targets, Nolan Cassidy and Giannis. Nolan Cassidy I really didn't care for at first, but I definitely warmed up to him after a few playthroughs. It's just fun to infiltrate the home of a guy whose whole thing is high level security, and to turn his own superstition on himself by eliminating him. He's nothing that special, but I do think he's a good secondary. Giannis, in my opinion, is the much better of the two, both in terms of lore and assassination opportunities. As far as I know, he's the first target in the game directly linked to 47, and it's crazy how a guy who can barely leave his home made me feel intimidated on first play. Assassination opportunities for both, aside from Nolan's basement kill and a few others, are limited and definitely lacking. And honestly, the whole map just lacks substance. The clue collection side of the mission is an absolute pain and really uncomfortable on replays. I'm genuinely shocked that they haven't been made optional after the first completion. I guess it's just 𝐓𝐢𝐸𝐸 being 𝐓𝐢𝐸𝐸. Pretty sweet, middle of the road map that definitely isn't a favourite, but it's also not bad. 6 out of 10. While I was ordering my list, this map and the one above it I went back and forth between because I just didn't know which one I preferred. After replaying both one more time just to make sure, I ultimately decided that Mumbai was the weaker of the two, which is sad because I think this map has a heck of a lot going for it. First of all, Dawood Rangan is perhaps the best target in the entire trilogy, only being rivaled by known degenerate Silvio Caruso. He's also the sexiest target and clearly a world star in more areas than just his incredible acting and directing. Nah, but for real, he's genuinely one of the most interesting targets in the entire game. In fact, his plotline is honestly the best, taking advantage of the poor backstory in the game, even better than Chongqing's Hush, one of my favourite targets. I also think that the skyscraper in which he's based, like the consulate in Marrakesh, provides an amazing contrast with the slums of Mumbai and makes him look even more scummy. Aside from Rangan's side of the mission though, the map to me is quite disappointing and doesn't come anywhere near the same level of quality. The attention to detail and immersion is of course up to snuff and very well done, but the map has the same distance problem as Marrakesh. Though unlike Marrakesh, it actually does use the space between the two primary targets with the inclusion of the Maelstrom. Speaking of the Maelstrom, I think he's okay, but he would be much much better if you actually knew where he was on replays. Then there's the final target, Vanya Shah, who you'll find hanging around the abandoned train depot, who is easily the worst of the three. Even though I do like her design and her similar lore to Rangan, with her taking advantage of the poor, she's just much more of a standard target, and the area feels way less inviting, and not in a good way. And again, nobody will ever be sexier than Rangan, so there's basically no contest. What sunk this map below the one above it for me is that I just think this map is worse when it comes to disguises and overall design, but I will definitely admit that nothing in it comes close to Dawood Rangan's side of Mumbai. I can easily see why people rank this as one of their favourites. It's a very iconic map and it has a ton of stuff to do. It just isn't really one of mine. In my opinion, definitely a big step up, but still lacking when it comes to design. 6 out of 10. So as you heard me say before, Isle of Scale just barely topped Mumbai for me, and there's definitely reasons as to why it shouldn't. While I dig the map's actual look, the level design is fucking garbage. It's very restrictive, and like many other poorly designed maps, there's a ton of space that just never gets used. The Ark Society angle I found interesting at first, but it honestly feels like poor compensation thrown on top to hide the absolutely awful mission planning. Though speaking of that, this map oddly made a good decision by having the constant extraction angle be optional on replays, which further confuses me as to why other maps don't follow suit, but I digress. This map might have a generally poor skeleton, but I honestly think it's a good map overall. Sophia Washington is extremely boring and forgettable, though for some reason I really like Zoe. They're basically the same character, but I really remember Zoe's sly dialogue and the general socialite vibe she gives off. The voice actress did a really good job selling her entitlement and her way of thinking. I said the level was poorly designed as well, but that doesn't mean the mechanics and assassination methods are bad. In fact, they are way up there with the best. The disguise hierarchy is very clear, crisp, and well coordinated, and rivals maps like Paris and Hokkaido in terms of quality, which I really appreciate. It helps to hide the poor level design and makes gameplay smoother. The kills, especially the ones with Zoe, are also really fun, and you can tell that's where most of the effort probably went. It's not hard to understand why this map is so polarizing, and how it ends up either at the very top or very bottom of basically everyone's lists. It has some of the best and worst aspects of the entire series, and showcases everything you hate and love about Hitman at the same time. I think this map should have been reworked before release, seeing as it is so irritating, but it definitely has enough good to push it up here. 6 out of 10. Like Carpathian Mountains, New York, Hawke's Bay and similar, Dubai takes place in a relatively isolated location. In Dubai's case, it's obviously the top of a skyscraper. I think this map is the best of the introductory locations in the series purely because it has explicit story relevance, but I will also admit that it's not really comparable to the others because it is more like a full-fledged level. I could argue that the level overuses gold and other shiny materials, but it does feel very much like the UAE to encrest their tallest skyscraper with golden elements. And even though it is a bit much, the rest of the map looks visually stunning and very slick. The actual design of the map itself is also really well done. You'd think that the verticality of it would be a downside, but it means that almost every floor has a great memorable layout, meaning that this map is an absolute joy on replays. In my opinion, what really carries this map though is the targets, and not necessarily the targets themselves. Ingram and Stuyvesant as members of Providence automatically have a leg up over some of the other targets in terms of lore, even with them being the least interesting of the trio we see in Hitman 3. But the way that you can eliminate these two and their map presence is incredible. A lot of the other maps have great assassinations too, but I think this map just brings it to a whole new frontier. You can kill them while skydiving, you can lock them in a room with you, you can kill Ingram while he's playing golf, and you can kick Stuyvesant off a fucking skyscraper. I don't know why I think it's so good, because there's obviously better, but this map is just so fun to replay for me. Definitely not the greatest map overall, but it has enough highs to the point I really enjoyed myself. 7 out of 10. The Delgado cartel have been hovering around the Hitman world of assassination lore for quite a while by now, and it only makes sense that the cartel would feature in a brand new location. A lot of people don't really rank this one among their favourites, but I think that Santa Fortuna is good enough to justify it being in the top 10. for a number of reasons, but primarily for its gorgeous look. This map is honestly my favourite of all of them if we consider just its visuals. It is incredibly pretty and rendered perfectly. The gameplay itself is also really neat. The targets are quite far from each other, and this is a common complaint against the map, but I do think that Jorge Franco and Andrea Martinez are extremely easy to get to, and their locations provide unique methods of assassination. Rico Delgado, however, steals the spotlight. Cartel leaders in fiction are always quite intimidating just based on what you think of them when you think of cartel, but Rico specifically has a particularly sinister and evil presence emanating from him at all times, which makes his brutal kills really satisfying. My only big complaint with this map is the Delgado mansion. Pretty much everyone doesn't like this part of the level because of how difficult it can be to get in, especially when you're doing suit only challenges, and I think the area is too large. Just the estate on its own feels practically as big as the Dartmoor map, and even though it connects really nicely with the cocaine fields, actually getting through it is hell on earth. This map also doesn't use all of its areas in the most engaging way. The riverside homes and the excavation site are practically useless outside of the kill setups, and the submarine angle of the map should really just be cut entirely in my opinion. I think that they should either cut the town in favour of the mansion grounds or cut the mansion grounds in favour of the town, because you can't really scrap the cocaine farm for a hotel, it's just kind of needed. I think that the map is a lot better than people give it credit for, but I do understand the criticisms. It's definitely got a lot more to do if it wants to crack the top 5, or especially the top 3, and I still don't think it's quite as sound as the other quote-unquote mansion maps. The mansion here is not important enough to be at the front of it, but it's also not completely irrelevant, so it's a perfect middle ground of mediocrity. Overall, this is a really good map, and it could have been among my favourites with just a few tweaks. 7 out of 10.
I present to you the 1945 Grand Paladin.
Mendoza is the first map on this list to feature Diana Burnwood outside of a cutscene and actually in a main mission, which is a pretty nice landmark. As for the actual map, Mendoza in my opinion is a great, really fun map and one of my favourites from Hitman 3. I preferred Dubai initially, but on my most recent playthrough, yeah, I think I prefer Mendoza. Like Dubai, this map has some of the best methods of assassination in the entire game, but unlike Dubai, more than just a few people agree with me. Having the map take place in a vineyard also makes a lot of sense for a penultimate mission. It does feel quite climactic, and without it, we wouldn't get the amazing kills, so nothing to complain about there. Something that you'll notice in the series is that a lot of maps follow a layout of having a target's home within a larger area, such as Caruso's mansion in Sapienza, Delgado's estate in Santa Fortuna, and Tyson's residence within Haven Island. In the case of Mendoza, it's the home of Yates. I do think that Haven Island and Sapienza do this better, but it's well integrated into the map, and it isn't just extra fluff to make the mission more interesting. You can tell that the people who worked on Mendoza's level design went above and beyond for their final true mission. The layout, while big, is relatively well used, and due to it being a winery and vineyard, it makes sense why it would be so large. I think that Yates and Vidal are passable targets. Not that interesting, but I do like how they play off of Diana in the mission, contrast each other in their approach, and actually have an impact on the story. It's a really well designed, extremely fun level that I enjoy playing, I just don't enjoy it as much as some of the others. Overall, this is a great map that would serve as a much better finale than Carpathian Mountains. 8 out of 10. Haven Island is a really good map, but shockingly, I don't have that much to say on it. Ever since it came out, I just haven't thought about anything more than the fact that it's pretty great. The eliminations are top of the range, the map is quite expansive but also easy to navigate, and the targets are mostly decent. This map is basically just Santa Fortuna, but with a map actually utilising its full potential, even if I think the targets are a little bit of a step down. When it comes to the actual setup for the mission, it is absolute perfection. Just the idea of a criminal organisation creating new identities for wrongdoers, all the while disguised as a PR firm for the rich and famous, is genuinely cool. Though it does feel a little bit like window dressing due to how there are no identity change related kills on the map. The assassinations are still cool though. Eliminating Steven and Ludmila in the hot tub, for example, is what immediately jumps to mind when I think of this trilogy, because it combines goofiness, multiple objectives, and a hilarious death sequence into one. I'm just impressed at how well this map uses its premise to create elaborate assassination methods in general. They don't feel needlessly spread out, because Steven and Ludmila regularly come into close contact with one another despite how large Haven Island is. And that's something even the best maps sometimes struggle with. And although I prefer just 2 targets, with Steven being the CEO of the company instead, the mansion angle with Tyson Williams is actually not bad. It's very easy to get into and super compact, feeling more like a villa than an entire estate, and having to enter it to do a challenge doesn't make me audibly groan. Lastly, the location is vibrant and expressive, and while I do prefer Santa Fortuna and Mendoza, it definitely makes the top 3. This map is absolutely stunning. Overall, an awesome map, and a great way to end Hitman 2. 8 out of 10.
Let me just activate the booth privacy setting for one moment. This way nobody can see or hear anything that goes on in here.
Practical.
Isn't it?
The Hitman main missions by Hitman 2 mostly tended to fall into one of two templates. The larger scale maps with 2 to 3 targets and an objective, or the smaller scale maps with just the one target and maybe an objective. And of the smaller Hitman levels, New York takes the cake single-handedly. I don't think this map can be much higher because it's definitely a bit too simple, but the fact that it is this high despite taking place in one building should say volumes about how awesome this map is. In terms of just the level design and disguise hierarchies, it really doesn't get much better than this. New York is almost flawless when it comes to the gameplay because not a single error is poorly used, and there is a pinpoint accuracy in the difficulty increase for each floor of the bank. Speaking of that, the Milton Fitzpatrick Bank is a very fresh setting for the series, and as a result, the location feels much grander than it really should be, because it's more comparable to a map like Hokkaido in how it feels. Big in scale, but not big in size. The best part about the bank, however, is of course, the data core objective. We've had a home invasion simulator already, so why not a bank robber one as well? They somehow made a bank simple to break into while keeping the security realistically tight, like a real bank would, which makes this map extremely immersive. The vault is realistic enough to the point it doesn't feel cheap, and the inherent silliness of Hitman means that getting past it doesn't have to be much of a challenge, so it does feel very welcome. Director Savalas, to be honest, isn't that memorable of a target, but she does have a very short loop making assassinations easy, and a high level of replayability due to this, so I can excuse the fact that she's a bit forgettable. If it had a bit more content and a more interesting target, it might have cracked the top 3, honestly. This map is just so good. This is one of the absolute best missions from Hitman 2, and honestly, the whole trilogy. 8 out of 10.
It's the paint that makes you the warrior. True believer. Russia. Paper cup loneliness.
Paris is a great map, and surprisingly so. It's obviously not the most unique Hitman map, but it feels distinctly memorable in a way that a classic show or film is. Paris is a map with a really good eye for detail and might just have the best aesthetic of all of the 2016 maps, aside from maybe Hokkaido. The setting of the fashion show provides a great mission backdrop, and the sound design is on point. I think I just love the slick and cleanly feel of Paris in general. Though according to my Parisian friend Vallejo, it is extremely unrealistic because Paris is apparently the dirtiest city ever. But whatever, it's a game. The actual mission planning, despite how early on this is in the world of Assassination saga, still stands strongly on 2 feet. Paris was the one that first introduced the concept of disguise hierarchies to the trilogy, and honestly, it hasn't been topped since. The map has 4 distinct levels, easy to tell apart disguises, and a floor plan that you actually understand, which helps you to remember which disguises get you where. This location is actually a masterclass when it comes to it, so I'm slightly disappointed that many of the following maps dropped it in favour of an overly complex layout. When it comes to the targets themselves, both of them are great. Viktor Novikov is easily the best secondary target in the series because his design and voice are full of this luxurious personality. He does give off this very prestigious feeling every time you see him, which makes for an intimidating target. His loop is not short, but it's also not needlessly long, and therefore there are a lot of really good ways to kill him. Dalia Margolis is also very iconic and has the best type of target backstory. The highly intelligent, very wealthy ringleader of Iago who needs to be eliminated in order to protect classified information from being auctioned off to the global elite. Literal perfection. The map, despite having a lot of seemingly empty areas, uses its space very well, and it never feels like you've taken 10 minutes to go between 2 regions of interest, which is a hallmark of good level design, seen only on the highest quality maps. This, in combination with its excellent gameplay and writing, make it among the best in my opinion. Though not quite the top 5. Not because of this map specifically, more so because there are just maps that in my opinion try a lot harder. This map is among myself and many people's favourites, and it's not hard to figure out why. It's the perfect template to be repeated for future missions, and I'm so glad they practically mastered what a Hitman mission should be on their first try. 9 out of 10. Miami is my favourite map from Hitman 2 and most people's favourite map of the entire trilogy. Admittedly though, it's not quite up there for me because of what I personally look for in a Hitman level, but this map is straight fire. The biggest and most important factor as to why it is so good is the level design and mission planning. Even though this map is in 5th place, it has the best spatial awareness of any location in the series, with the only exception being the one right above it. Miami just blows this aspect out of the water, and it's one of the few large maps that is actually worthy of being large. Almost every part of the map is perfectly interconnected, and as a result it probably has the smoothest traversal of any location. This is definitely thanks to the complexity of each room and building, but also the insane variety despite how little space there is to work with. This map is the strangest mix of locations I've ever seen, but somehow it doesn't feel inconsistent and everything comes together. Like, I'd never imagine a marina, a robotics expo and a racetrack working well with each other, but the fact that it does shows just how ambitious Miami tried to be. A racing event is one of the coolest settings you could possibly have for a Hitman location. Sierra Knox is also one of my favourite targets of the series, and not really because of the lore surrounding Kronstadt and her defection from Providence. It's more so the fact that she's practically inaccessible for most of the mission and how the game encourages you to play around with the race's mechanics. And while Sierra's side of the map is clearly superior, Robert Knox and his robots are also pretty fun. It's definitely got the weaker area usage, but the expo itself is the best singular area of the map, with its many rooms and particularly exciting methods of elimination. Where the map I think loses points is that between it and the ones above it, it's just way less visually interesting. It's a good looking map with a lot of attention to detail like always, but it's definitely a bit standard considering how pretty and aesthetically pleasing some of the others are. I also think that even though the map does use its space very well, I still don't particularly like the larger maps of Hitman, and would prefer that some of the areas get cut. Overall, this is a fantastic episode of the saga and stands with some of the strongest bones of the lot. 9 out of 10. After the very messy and controversial Colorado tried to reinvent the wheel unsuccessfully, 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐸 out of nowhere proceeded to immediately give us perhaps the best example of difficulty escalation in the entire series. What makes Hokkaido such a spectacular level is how, unlike Colorado, it is actually subtle with its upgrade and difficulty. This is the first time in the series where the game tells you that you can't keycard or lockpick your way through the map, because every lock is electronic. Then you think, okay, simple, just bring some scramblers and you'll be fine. Then you find that it's locked until mastery level 20. While I typically don't like it when games lock primary features behind skill walls, I think Hokkaido just barely makes it work by having such intuitive and immersive puzzle solving. This map makes what feels like a small location feel complex and challenging. But unlike Isle of Scale or similar, it doesn't sacrifice the fun or smooth gameplay with its various angles. Unlike Paris, it also has the best disguise mechanics of any map. Hokkaido's unique hierarchy wins massive points because your disguise signifies your proximity in relation to the primary target, Eric Sodas, who has some of the best elimination methods of any target in the series. I also think it looks great. While it isn't the most visually stunning level, the comfortable feeling of the Gamma Clinic almost gives you a false sense of security with where this level is trying to go. It doesn't feel like a harsh environment, it's actually quite inviting. And I love that there isn't an unrealistic amount of security. As a world-leading private hospital, you'd think they would completely flood it with suspicious NPCs. But surprisingly, it's a relatively tame location. When it comes to the targets, I do like Yuki Yamazaki, but she's undeniably forgettable. And even with her having a backstory as cool as a Yakuza lawyer, it does not excuse her limited map presence. She's a standard target with great eliminations, but unfortunately not much else. Eric Sodas is the opposite end of the spectrum. What makes Sodas such a great target is that he is stationary for the whole mission, and more like an objective that needs to be completed, if anything. You don't even have to keep track of the loot, which means there's full freedom with opportunities. This is the key component that separates Hokkaido from Colorado, the fact that they focused on quality over quantity. An easy to eliminate target with a challenging fortress of map mechanics is a lot better than 2 extra targets and the whole map being hostile, in my opinion. I understand that I'm comparing this map a lot to others, but in order to truly appreciate the absolute brilliance of it, you have to consider the difference in quality between badly designed maps like Isle of Scale or Colorado and this one. Hokkaido feels like a genuine Hitman map through and through, and there hasn't been a map quite like it since. Hokkaido has some of the most engaging gameplay and design of the entire selection, and just for that, I seriously owe one to the developers. 9 out of 10. Just based on how most people seem to talk about Chongqing, I might just be the biggest defender out there. This is my personal favourite Hitman map. It's the one I replay the most and perfect for a rainy day. It's definitely inflated in its position just because of how much I love it, but I think there are also legitimate reasons as to why it does belong at least in the top 10. First of all, this is by far the vibiest Hitman map, and I know not everyone likes the neon rain look, but I adore it. Because of this, and how the very futuristic look contrasts the poverty, there's this eerie forgotten city feeling. It just emanates ancient, monumental power, and with the combination of the music plus the scale, it's very tonally distinct. Even for a man as unstoppable as 47, it feels like he's a fish out of water. It's like you really are in the 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐸 district, completely overshadowed by the buildings around you. It's also perhaps the only level that is truly centered around its targets, rather than having the targets just be there because why not. Hush, for example, is extremely well implemented. A cyber terrorist experimenting with transhuman technology and using the lower class as test subjects is somewhat reflective of many places in the world. The area in which he's based also reminds me of a mini Paris, in that every single floor seems to be a little more dangerous than the previous. Just not quite as extreme, of course, because this is just a single area, whereas Paris is an entire map. Right, now for the difficult bit. The part which everyone seems to hate on this map is the ICA facility. And no, I don't mean that one, I mean this one. Imogen Royce definitely feels like she was thrown in last minute because I always hear her actress voicing the generic NPCs. Though she does have a badass design, and like Hush, rules over the people around her with an iron fist. As for the ICA facility itself, it is not very well integrated. I do like how secretive it is, but I can't help but get annoyed with how you can only really go in or out, as there's no corridors to get between there and Hush's hideout, which is something that even Marrakesh has. The data core objective, for example, is really fucking annoying on replays, and I wish they'd make it optional. Most of the time when I play, I find myself making a save in the facility, because going back and forth can be really irritating. It's also very generic visually, though it is at least aesthetically pleasing. The facility on its own though, when stripping away the mediocre implementation, I actually really love. I do enjoy how you have to use your camera and 3 tiers of dongles in order to traverse through it, and even though it makes the silent assassin suit only challenges very rigid, the map at least didn't throw an insane amount of security on top of that. Yet another Hokkaido comparison, but the facility reminds me a lot of the Gamma Clinic based on how the locks are all electronic, and your level of access symbolises your proximity to the target, except unlike Soda's, Royce actually does have a loop. It's luckily quite short though, so there isn't a lot of waiting around involved. Chongqing is a good map, and while it's only really this high because of personal preference, it's also very underrated. And just for my enjoyment, 10 out of 10. Something that I often overlook is that Hitman 2016 by the time of this video is pretty old. While I enjoy it now, admittedly it didn't hook me at first. The ICA tutorials were really boring, but understandable, and Paris was a very good map with a lot of visual style and excellent gameplay. But it was, and still is, kind of basic. And when going into the next map, Sapienza, I didn't really expect much. After playing it a few times and getting it to mastery level 20 however, I completely changed my mind and realised I was dead wrong. Even though it wasn't the first Hitman game ever released, it is very impressive that Sapienza ended up this good for a brand new chapter. It holds up amazingly well with the rest of the catalogue, especially in terms of its detailing and graphics. If it weren't for the NPCs, you can mistake a lot of these shots for real life. It's not even my favourite map visually, but it's still the most realistic even after 7 years. At least in my opinion, that is. Sapienza's area usage and gameplay also deserve a big round of applause. It's probably the only location that legitimately feels like nothing's being hidden from us. It tells us that Sapienza is a small town on the Amalfi Coast, and it is a small town on the Amalfi Coast. As a result, it feels really organic, which is satisfying to say the least. Villa Caruso is also far and away the most memorable and iconic of the mansions in the trilogy, even more so than Dartmoor, which is literally nothing but a mansion. It's not only an integral part of the map, but it actually makes sense being there, because a wealthy, historic family household as a base of operations for a biotech company strangely makes sense. The mansion being such a focus also reminds me that a lot of locations tend to follow this really annoying trend where they feel the need to use every corner of the level. But in Sapienza, the town is just kind of a backdrop, and a melting pot of different challenges and opportunities. Caruso, DeSantis and the virus are all within the mansion and lab grounds, so there are very little points during the mission where you find an area to be completely useless. There's practically no secondary hotspot, so the game encourages you to do what you'd like with the rest of the map. Essentially, you have a location with really good balancing, detailing and gameplay incentives, but without the sometimes infantilizing target separation. It's literally everything I could ever ask for in a Hitman level, and I haven't even gotten to my favourite part yet. 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐚𝐦𝐩𝐬, as I mentioned previously, might just be the best target in the trilogy. I'm a sucker for good lore, but the world of Assassination trilogy isn't really known for its story like some of the other installments are. 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐚𝐦𝐻, however, is one of the few exceptions. This is the only time I've legitimately felt bad for a target. Manipulated and abused by his mother to the point of fearing women and eventually murdering her out of spite, haunted by this for the rest of his life, and eventually being murdered himself due to the concerns of the 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐸 Corporation, despite his good intentions. Like, this is a game where you can disguise yourself as a golf coach and seduce one of the targets in order to kill her. I really do appreciate how a game that I best describe as extremely goofy can actually write in a truly layered character seamlessly. As for the other two targets, they're perfectly fine, but they're not nearly as good as 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐚𝐦𝐻. Francesca DeSantis makes sense as a target, and as mentioned before, has some great assassination methods, but she is a bit standard. The virus also is super easy to complete, though I would prefer it to be optional on replays. Though then again, the virus is so well implemented anyway that it already smokes a ton of actual targets, so it's definitely forgivable. Not much else to say, honestly. Sapienza is an awesome map, and easily the most iconic. It just is one of the best maps in the series, and I struggle to find anything about it that makes me angry or even just annoyed. 10 out of 10. When I first put together a draft of what this list was going to be, I knew Berlin was going to rank high. But it was only when I replayed a bunch of the maps before revising my list and changing a lot of my opinions that Berlin became my favourite. This level is really something special, both to the Hitman games and to me. There's a lot of debate about whether Hitman is a true stealth series or not, and even though it's not necessarily a bad thing if it isn't, the series is known for how it uses AI to craft different tiers of difficulty depending on the environment you're in. Many maps do this very well and have become some of my favourite levels in AAA gaming, and of course, a heck of a lot have disappointed or underwhelmed me too. Berlin doesn't do this type of gameplay underwhelmingly or even very well. It does it basically to perfection. Berlin is far and away one of the best video game levels I've ever played. In my eyes, not a single one of these maps, no matter how good they are, get nearly every single thing right and have practically nothing wrong with them. The only thing that I can think of is that this map's actual design isn't my favourite, and that's it. I really mean it when I say that I think Berlin is perfect for this trilogy. The club's layout flows really smoothly, and while the map isn't that visually diverse, it doesn't look exactly the same all over, meaning that even if I think the location itself isn't that interesting, it is a great sandbox mission. Sandbox style gameplay is extremely rare in the series, and the only maps that I'd say feature this are the top 3 of my list: Chongqing, Sapienza, and Berlin. While the other 2 achieve it by having plenty of detailed streets lined with things that only need to be explored if you want to, Berlin does it through the just right amount of differentiation between its areas. I've mentioned the term disguise hierarchy a heck of a lot in this video, especially with the maps that do it well, and what a surprise. We have yet another location with a disguise hierarchy that is arguably the best. Like Paris, Hokkaido and 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐸 before it, the disguises are really easy to tell apart, you know exactly where they get you, and it makes the very loud and eventful areas easier to get around. Very good stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of good in this map. But the most important reason as to why this map is in first place is fucking obvious to anyone who's played it. Instead of 1 or 2 targets to eliminate, you have an entire fleet of agents after you. And it's not even just that, you get to choose which ones to eliminate, and you can kill as many as you want if you go about it the right way. The systematic eliminations of the ICA agents are really solid, and they encourage you more than any other level to use your surroundings, without the map pulling the video game equivalent to guiding you blind, by including a bunch of mission stories. The absence of mission stories strips away the safety belt that you usually get on first playthrough, and like Sapienza, it doesn't treat you like a 3-year-old and earns itself massive points for this. Going against the kind of people who used to work with you, and the gradual build-up of excitement from their fear and anticipation of your capabilities, is one of the most enthralling things in this series. The confrontation you have with Agent Montgomery is the best demonstration of this. It's an amazing moment of suspense and adrenaline, yet another showcase of 47's insane abilities. One of the few times where Hitman becomes pure action and multiple eliminations in less than 15 seconds. Literally the only thing it's missing is the possibility of qualifying for Silent Assassin. This genuinely might be my favourite moment in the whole trilogy. Berlin succeeds in everything it tries to do to a shocking degree, and truly deserves the title as the World of Assassination trilogy's best map. 10 out of 10. So there you have it. Every World of Assassination map ranked from worst to best. I'd like to thank you all for watching if you made it to this point, as this video took a ton of time to put together. And while that's not the most original thing to say, I really mean it, this video took a while. This is also my very first video, so I'd appreciate some constructive feedback on what I can improve for next time. Also, you know, feel free to disagree with my opinions. Most of them are kinda terrible anyway, so make of it what you will. Oh, and if you're curious as to where the ICA facility would rank, it'd be last place, like come on now. And with that, I have not much else to say. I guess for now, goodbye!